GoForThe2.com. We're into the final stretch run, week 14 of the college football season. Conference championships, titles are on the line with possible playoff appearances. Doesn't get better than this. Marquee battles across the board. Starts on Friday night, continues all the way through Saturday. Let's get right into it. Big Ten championship game, Michigan State and Iowa. I've been on Iowa all season long. Thought they would start out 8-0. Thought they would get to the Big Ten championship game against Ohio State at the start of the season. Michigan State is standing in their way, but I still like Iowa in this matchup. I think their offensive line is playing very well. If you've watched Iowa play all season long, very balanced team. They're passing for 200 yards per game, rushing for 203 yards per game, have a solid quarterback in C.J. Beathard, and have a staple of running backs led by Jordan Canzeri that allows Kirk Ferentz to have fresh legs in the ballgame at all times. You saw what they were able to do in the second half against Nebraska last week. Jordan Canzeri, 140 rushing yards, 2 key touchdowns to give Iowa the 28-20 victory. You look at Iowa overall, plus 14 in turnover margin, but they've done it on the road with a plus 8 margin heading into this matchup. Michigan State is plus 14 in turnover margin as well, but they are even on the road this year. You look at Iowa, they've played some solid competition on the road. Their combined record of their opponents in their 5 victories is 33-27 overall. So Iowa stepped up on the road, has played some top-notch teams, and has dominated the competition. I like the way the Hawkeyes are playing. You look at that secondary led by Desmond King. He leads FBS in total interceptions with 8. I think he matches up well on the outside with Burbridge. I think that defensive front, that front 7 of Iowa can cause some problems for Michigan State. Michigan State, outside that 205 rushing yards performance on the road in Columbus 2 weeks ago, outside of that, the previous 5 games, Michigan State was only averaging 130 rushing yards per game. Their offensive line was inconsistent, and Connor Cook got beat up in the game against Maryland in East Lansing. So not sold on the consistency of Michigan State. Think Iowa's been much more consistent from start to finish, and I think this is a destined team that will be in the playoff following Saturday night. I think it is high scoring. I do think Iowa gets the 30-23 victory over Michigan State in Indianapolis and moves on to 13-0 later Saturday night. Another intriguing matchup is Florida and Alabama in the SEC championship game. Florida coming off a disappointing 27-2 loss at home to Florida State. Offensively, they could not get a lot going, especially inside the red zone. Treon Harris struggled. But you look at Alabama overall, they had a methodical, lackluster victory over Auburn. They scored late in that matchup, 29-13 over Auburn. They pounded the Tigers with Derrick Henry, 271 rushing yards on the afternoon. That offensive line wore down the Auburn front 7 defensively. They forced Auburn into field goals. They're going to be playing a very tough defensive front in Florida. This is a Florida defense, even though Alabama is statistically ranked number 1 in college football, giving up only 264 total yards per game. This is an Alabama offensive line that's going to be challenged, in my opinion, by the front 7 of Florida. You look at that interior line led by Jonathan Bullard. This is a Gator defense that's only given up 111 rushing yards per game. They have 38 sacks on the year. They're plus 10 in turnover margin, but more importantly, have done it on the road with a plus 8 margin. This is a team that's been very opportunistic. More importantly, Florida's secondary matches up very well against Calvin Ridley and Foster on the outside. Led by Vernon Hargraves, I think they're going to force Jacob Coker to work down the field, and I don't think this is the same type of defensive front that you saw last week in Auburn. Very solid defensive front by Florida. I think their defense keeps them in this game from start to finish. In the end, though, I do think Alabama gets the victory, but I think it's very close. I think it's 27-20. Alabama gets the victory, but Florida is in striking distance from start to finish in this game because of their opportunistic defense. Another statistic that Florida has is third down conversions on their opponents. Florida's only allowed 30% to their opponents on third down. On the road, it dips down to 27%. So keep that in mind for this matchup. Florida, very solid in third down defense, heading up against a methodical offense in Alabama. Think Alabama wins, but it is very close. Another interesting matchup, Houston and Temple. Contrasting styles. Temple, a ball control, methodical attack, solid defense led by Tyler Medikevich. What can you say about Houston? High-octane offense that's balanced. They're rushing and passing for over 200 yards per game, led by their dynamic quarterback, Greg Ward Jr. This is a high-octane offense that's going to put pressure on this Temple defense on Saturday night. But keep in mind, Temple's defense on the road, not as solid as it is at home this year. Temple giving up about 167 rushing yards per game, and they're giving up about 279 passing yards per game on the road this year. That's way more than their season average. So not the same type of dominant defense in the Temple Owls that we've seen in Philadelphia. It's a team that struggled on the road, and you look at Houston overall, an opportunistic defense that's plus 15 in turnover margin heading into this matchup. I think the speed on the perimeter is the difference for Houston in this matchup. I think Temple is a methodical ball control offense led by their quarterback, P.J. Walker. I think Houston strikes fast, strikes early, and puts a lot of pressure on Temple to respond. I don't think their offense is capable of trading touchdown for touchdown with Houston, and I do think that Houston gets a convincing victory. If you watch this game last year, it was a close ball game in the first half, but the speed of Houston wore down Temple's defense later in that matchup, and Houston did get a convincing victory last year in Houston. So keep that in mind. I think this is a much more prolific offense this year with Greg Ward Jr. I think they have weapons on the outside. Whether Kenneth Farrell can go or not, their starting running back, I don't think it matters. Kevin Wilson, the former defensive back that came in last week, rushed for 111 yards. He's a slashing running back that has great vision, 2 touchdowns last week against Navy. He gives them an added dimension out of the backfield, and I like Houston's speed in this matchup to dominate Temple this coming weekend. Another intriguing matchup is USC and Stanford. USC lost this matchup 41-31 earlier in the year. They're coming off a dominating 40-21 home victory over UCLA. Very impressed the way Cody Kessler's played. He's only thrown 1 interception in the last 6 games. Look at the secondary by USC. They've been exploited, but they're very opportunistic at times. They have 10 interceptions over the last 5 games. You look at USC's rush defense. They've been solid for the most part over the last 6 games since head coach Helton took over for Sarkisian. This has been a much better rush defense in USC overall. I know they're without Cameron Smith, their freshman phenom linebacker, but I like the way Cravens and this other linebacking core has stepped up. I like the secondary of USC, and I think they get a solid road victory in Levi Stadium this coming weekend over Kevin Hogan. I know Kevin Hogan and Stanford have owned USC overall, but I like the speed on the perimeter to challenge Stanford's secondary. Stanford has trouble with speed teams. They had trouble earlier in the year against Oregon. They had trouble on Saturday night with Will Fuller and the dynamic Notre Dame wide receiver core. I look for Juju Smith and the USC Trojans to exploit the Stanford secondary on Saturday night, and I think that's the difference. Like Cody Kessler in this matchup, I think USC can create some turnovers in this game, and I do think they get revenge. I think it's high scoring. I think USC gets the 41-35 victory and knocks out Stanford for a possible college football playoff appearance late Saturday night. Another intriguing matchup, Clemson and North Carolina. North Carolina won 10 straight. They're hitting on all cylinders, led by their quarterback, Marquise Williams. Clemson, more methodical wins, have struggled in back-to-back weeks now against Syracuse, have struggled against South Carolina last weekend. Doesn't look like the same Clemson team, but I think this team steps up Saturday night in the ACC Championship. You look at North Carolina overall, they've won 4 games this year, North Carolina has, by a total of 28 points. Prior to that victory on the road in Raleigh last Saturday, North Carolina won a total of 3 games by 17 points. They beat Georgia Tech and Pittsburgh by 7 points apiece, beat Virginia Tech by 3 points in overtime, and then jumped out to a big lead against North Carolina State and held on for the 11-point victory last Saturday. Well, Clemson overall, very solid in run support, only giving up about 128 rushing yards per game, but more importantly, they're very solid in the secondary, only giving up 160 passing yards per game. To me, I think that's the difference heading into this matchup. When I look at both quarterbacks, Deshaun Watson, Marquise Williams, I have more confidence in Deshaun Watson heading into this matchup. I think he's cleaner with the football, makes solid decisions. When you look at Marquise Williams overall, he's turnover prone. He almost cost UNC the victory on the road against Virginia Tech, has done that throughout the season, has fumble issues. I like the speed of Clemson, not only on the offense, but on the defense. You look at North Carolina overall, only 23 sacks on the year. I think they're going to have to get to Deshaun Watson. I don't think they can do it. And I think the speed of Artavius Scott on the outside really exploits the North Carolina secondary. And I think Clemson dominates this matchup. I think they win this game by 17 points. I think it's high scoring as well. 49-32. Clemson gets the victory and moves on to the playoff Saturday night in Charlotte. It is a home game for North Carolina. Game being played in Charlotte. They opened the year there against South Carolina, lost that matchup 16-13 against the Gamecocks. Gamecocks, keep that in mind, week number 1. Southern Miss and Western Kentucky for the Conference USA Championship. Intriguing matchup. Really like the way Southern Miss is playing with quarterback Nick Mullins, dominating Louisiana Tech last week. They put up 58 points, jumped out fast, very dynamic offense led by the Golden Eagles, led by their head coach Todd Monken. But it's the defense that impresses me in this matchup. You look at a defense in Southern Miss that is giving up 22 points per game to their opponents. But more importantly, it's the rush defense of Southern Miss that I think can make Western Kentucky one-dimensional. You look at Southern Miss in the last 7 games now, has only allowed 101 rushing yards per game. To me, I think they'll force Western Kentucky into being one-dimensional. I think they'll force Brandon Doughty to throw over the top. Brandon Doughty, a dominant quarterback. But I like Southern Miss in terms of offense and defense. Think that they're a more complete team, and I like the way they're playing. I know they're going on the road, but I think they get the victory in this matchup, knock off Brandon Doughty in this game. I think it's very close. 51-48. Southern Miss upsets Western Kentucky in the Conference USA title game. I think it's a very tight game through and through, but in the end, Southern Miss does get the road victory and claim the Conference USA title. Another intriguing matchup that's off the grid, West Virginia and Kansas State. West Virginia playing very, very well because they're running the football with Russell Shell and Wendell Smallwood. You look at Kansas State, they come on off a dominating victory over arch rival Kansas. They're sitting at 5-6 overall. They have an opportunity to become bowl eligible, but I really think West Virginia is the better team, not only offensively, but defensively to me. This is a dominant defense against Kansas State. I don't like Joe Huebner going up against the West Virginia secondary. They're opportunistic. They match up well on the outside in terms of pass coverage. And in terms of run support, I like the way West Virginia is playing right now. They're physical. They're forcing teams to methodically work down the field. Don't like Kansas State's matchup in this game. I know they're at home in Manhattan, but I think West Virginia dominates this game, moves Kansas State to 5-7 on the year. I think they run at will on the Wildcats, and I do think that West Virginia gets a convincing 40-20 road victory over Kansas State. I don't even think it's close. I think West Virginia, Wendell Smallwood, Russell Shell, way too much for the Kansas State defensive